The Allies of Humanity, Book 4, received by Marshall V. Summers. Third Briefing, Freedom in the Universe. Now we will give you a perspective on what freedom looks like once it is established. To be free, a world has to have a united government. It may have representatives from different groups and regions of a world, but it must be a united government. It cannot be a patchwork of warring tribes or even great nations, for that will only invite intervention and manipulation. The nations that are free foster individual creativity and the value of knowledge within the individual. But this knowledge has to be directed where it can serve the greater interests of the world and not merely the preoccupations of the individual. True talent here is highly recognized and valued, but it must be directed. It is not merely the providence of the individual. It is part of the wealth of the nation. Unlike unfree nations, where people's lives are simply catalogued and directed, where individual talent is rarely utilized, where stature in society is based upon family lineage or regional needs alone, in the free nations the individual is valued, and their skills and their wisdom are cultivated because this wisdom and skill are needed for the stability and well-being of the world. They are sent to serve where they can be of the greatest benefit, but it is based upon the need of the whole, not merely the desires of the individual. A world of errant individuals will never be able to establish freedom in the greater community. Here individuality must serve, but it serves according to the individual, and this is one of the things that distinguishes a free nation from a nation that is not free. In a free nation, dissension is tolerated, but only to a certain point. If there is constant rebellion, the nation can never be stable. It can never assume a greater mantle of freedom to even protect the freedoms that it offers its citizens. It must have this stability and this security from the outside. You do not yet realize you are living in the greater community and are subject to its influences, so perhaps this seems very different to you from where you stand at this moment. But it is something you must begin to understand and to entertain. To be a united force, there must be an understanding of the great need that requires this freedom, and a willingness to participate and even to sacrifice certain personal freedoms for its sake. The freedom that you now enjoy is largely only to serve the whims or the desires of the individual. But in the greater community, this is not what freedom means. Free societies must maintain their native resources as much as possible and only engage in commerce with other free nations for essential things. Therefore, the plundering of their worlds cannot happen, cannot be allowed, if there is to be any stability and security going forward. There must be great restraint here, for wisdom always requires great restraint. And freedom always means you must be aware of those things you are really not free to do. It is the freedom of the world. It is the freedom of the whole nation of the world that secures the rights of individuals in the greater community. But these rights will be limited out of necessity. For free nations to remain free, they must be able to thwart or resist all the temptations that will be placed upon them, especially if their worlds are seen to be valuable to others. Here you must see that freedom is seen as a great threat to the unfree nations. They are afraid the freedoms that the free nations have may influence their own populations in some way, leading to rebellion, discontent, and dissension. Such things as art and music and dance that you enjoy today would be seen as a great threat to the cultures that are not free. Individual freedoms that the free nation can give its citizens would be seen as a threat to those nations that are not free. As a consequence, free nations do not broadcast out into the universe. They do not reveal what life is like in their worlds, if they can avoid it. They do not engage in larger networks of trade, which are always very controlling and manipulative, and make one's own world vulnerable to the powers of persuasion on a far greater scale. Free nations must be largely self-sufficient here. They must be very united. They must be very discreet. These are the three great requirements of freedom in the universe, and you cannot escape them. There are no exceptions here. The free nations, being discreet, do not travel around the universe seeking to plant their flags or to exert their influence or seek to intervene in the affairs of others. They may promote freedom and responsibility, as we are doing through these briefings, but they do not intervene. For to intervene is to transgress one's own discretion. To intervene is to make yourself known in the larger universe, and free nations do not want to do this. Their insulation is critical to their unique accomplishments. In the free nations, the power of knowledge in the individual is valued and supported, even within the restraints of their society. In unfree nations, this is either unknown or brutally suppressed. And the gatherings of the wise in unfree nations must occur in great secrecy in order to survive, which is often the case. People of your world think the universe must be better than the world itself, more elevated, more free, more spiritual, more ethical, to be sought, to be encouraged, to be invited into this world. This is perhaps the normal expectation of races living in isolation. Such was the same in our worlds until our emergence into the greater community began, and we had to face intervention. We are telling you these things because you must understand what the journey of freedom really is about. It is not about individual happiness. It is about the freedom of your race. It is not about individual pursuits or indulgences. It is about the stability and security of your world. Freedom here is not a right in the universe. It is a great privilege and a great accomplishment that must be earned earnestly and consistently and protected against all challenges. You cannot have a romantic view of life in the universe if you hope to survive within it. Such is the great sobriety that wisdom brings. Do not have fanciful notions about the value of contact, or what other races can teach you about freedom through their intervention in your world, for that is a fatal error, and a tragic one at that. We know, through the networks of the wise, how much has been given to this world to sustain and support the threads of freedom and wisdom that still exist here. Much has been invested in your world for this purpose. Even as you escalate and progress in your technological development, there is great emphasis on your world for its potential here. Its potential to be a free race in the universe, a potential that you must seize upon and develop through your own will and cooperation with one another. We cannot give you this freedom, and there is no other race in the universe who can give you this freedom, nor come here and establish it for you. Any race that promises this is truly deceiving you and is here for other purposes, their own purposes. It is, however, to our benefit to have another free race within this sector of space. We would welcome that, though we seek no formal relations. You are not ready for formal relations, and you may not be ready for a long time to come. You are not strong enough. You are not united enough. You are not mature enough, still indulging yourself in conflict and war and destructive competition. If we can support the emergence of knowledge in worlds such as yours, we will do that according to the dictates of the divine, through the networks of knowledge, not through the networks of governments. Even our own governments do not know what we are doing here. Though they would support it in theory, it is not wise for them to have this knowledge, for then they would have to be responsible for our actions. For in most cases, free nations have had to make non-intervention agreements with the larger nations around them in order to keep these larger nations out of the free nations' sphere and activities. We are contravening this in our small presence in service to your world, for we are governed by higher powers, of which you know little about, but of which you must become educated, and we will speak of this next.